Such a pretty song. That was the second part of Mikoilos from Eitan Katz, Rabbi Eitan Katz, on his album Unplugged number 3, the songs of Shlomo Carlebach. Let's light up the darkness with a new wisdom candle. All right. Who's in the house on a Thursday evening? It's almost Shabbos. So excited. James in Annapolis, Yehuda in South Carolina, Tom in PA, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bill in Missouri, Bella in Florida, Elisa says hello, John in the Pacific Northwest, Nancy in North Carolina, Pam in Georgia, Lucy in Minnesota, Renee in Indiana, Sharon in New Jersey, Paula in Chicago, Caleb in Pittsburgh, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Maine, Heather in the hospital. May you have a complete recovery of mind, body, spirit. Carol is in the house with us. Over there on the YouTube side, Aoife checking in from Florida. Welcome, everybody. We are finally going to complete Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 3. We're holding on page 36. It's a nice number in the Jewish tradition, Lamed Vav 36. We have it's not only double 18, right? 18 is a multiple. The number 18, we often use it to make donations because the number 18 is associated with the Hebrew word chai, life. So you give life to someone when you make a donation. And so often you'll give, if you want to give more than 18, you might double and give 36. But we also have a tradition that there are 36 tzaddikim, 36 righteous souls in every generation. And no matter how corrupt and evil the world becomes, such that God might think about, it's just not worth it. These humans, they're just so evil. They're doing so much rottenness to each other, making each other suffer. Maybe I should start over the way I did with the flood. And Noah, right? So, God promised he would never destroy the world by way of flood again, but he could destroy it by other means. But he doesn't. And the reason God doesn't, according to our tradition, is not only because there's a promise of a future redemption when the Messiah comes, but in every generation, even before the Messiah comes, there are 36 hidden saints in the world. And their goodness, their righteousness is so perfect and complete that they sustain the whole world with their merit. And anyway, so we're on page 36, and we've been talking about, with respect to this Mishnah number 1 in chapter 3. Generally, we're in the 15th volume of the Talmud, Tractate Kesubos, the laws of marriage contracts. And there's this general distinction that a woman who enters her marriage as a virgin receives a larger contract. Now, that doesn't mean she gets money, or she gets paid, or her dad gets paid because she gets married. It means it's a kind of a premarital agreement that favors her, a prenup, as it were, so that if the husband were to divorce her, he would owe her a large amount of money, so that husbands who had the unilateral right of divorce wouldn't cavalierly send their wives packing if they just got upset with them one day. But a woman who enters marriage as a virgin gets twice the marriage contract as other women. And then here we learned in chapter 3 that in addition to that aspect of getting married, there's also this idea that because you come into it with a higher value if you are a virgin, so then what happens to a woman who is raped or seduced? So then she's no longer a virgin. And if it's not her fault that she's not a virgin, she still doesn't get the larger marriage contract. But at the time of the rape, there's a punishment in the Torah that the rapist pays a fine and is obligated to marry her, and he will never be permitted to divorce her. He has to support her for the rest of his life. That's if she is willing, if she wants to go into that marriage. She's certainly not forced to do so. There's technicalities of that law, and we've been talking about that. And as part of this discussion, we learned that when there is a fine and corporal punishment that accrues at the same moment, they're not both going to be meted out to the defendant, as it were. Either he's going to pay damages, or a fine, and a fine and damages are different, as we discussed yesterday, or he's going to be executed if it's a death penalty offense, or whipped, flogged, if it's a lesser than death penalty offense. But generally speaking, with some exceptions, but generally speaking, if he gets whipped, he doesn't pay the fine. And if he pays the fine, he doesn't get whipped. If he has a death penalty, he doesn't pay financial damages. If he pays financial damages, he won't get. It must be because the death penalty did not apply. It's not like you get out of the death penalty by paying a fine. If you are subject to the death penalty and the other conditions are met, like you were warned that if you do such and such, that's a death penalty offense, and then you did it anyway, and the court finds you guilty with the testimony of 2 witnesses, so you're executed. And if you're executed, you don't have to pay the fine. All right, we pick this up a few paragraphs into page 36. As I said, still discussing Mishnah number 1 of chapter 3. So the Baraisa stated, a girl who refuses to remain married to her husband receives neither payment of a fine for rape nor payment of a fine for seduction because she was married and therefore lost her presumptive status as a virgin. So you want to get the sequence of events here. This poor girl, her father died. So that's why this right of refusal enters the picture. Her father died, so it was not her father who gave her to be married while she was still a minor. Rather, her mother or brothers betrothed her to some guy who came into the picture. She, until she hits puberty, can say, you know what, this is not for me. I don't want it. My mom and my brothers shoved me into this, but I don't want it. Once she hits puberty, if she hasn't exercised that right of refusal, so then it's too late, and then now she's just married, right? And she can get a divorce. They can undo the marriage, but she will require a bill of divorce to do that from the husband. Before she hits puberty, she has the unilateral right to terminate the betrothal. And if she does exercise that right, it's as if she was never married. She doesn't need a bill of divorce because it's considered that she was never married. However, since she was living with this man, and they had these child brides in ancient times, one thing we might remember, by the way, is that life expectancy now is a lot longer than it was a couple thousand years ago. And so maybe it's not so shocking that they got married at a much younger age. Nevertheless, we study these laws to understand them, but there is no case that I'm aware of in the Jewish world today where children are married off. I've never heard such a thing. Maybe when they're teenagers they might do that, but certainly not, pre-puberty. Prepubescent girls are never married today, but the law provides for that. So if they were in that situation, that the mother or brothers married her off while she was a minor and then she refused the marriage, so she returns home, it's as if she was never married, but because she lived as a married woman for some time, she loses her presumptive state of virginity. And later when she gets married, she would qualify for the marriage contract she would qualify the marriage contract of a non-virgin, right? So the lower amount in her ketubah. And for that reason, if she's raped while she's waiting to get married, she doesn't receive the fine that is understood to be compensation for losing her virgin status, since, legally speaking, she would be presumed to have lost it already. So the Gemara infers, okay, so that's this girl who refused to stay in a marriage while she was a minor. But an ordinary minor girl who was not married, she's just an ordinary minor girl, if she's raped, she receives the fine for rape. And the Gemara asks, but an ordinary minor girl has a fine for rape. If so, in accordance with whose opinion is this Baraisa taught? It is the opinion of the rabbis who say a minor girl receives the fine for rape, right? That the fine, and remember, the fine, as I keep reminding you, but we might have new people today, the fine is different than damages, right? A rapist, first of all, it's a death penalty offense if it's proven, etc. But even if they can't use the death penalty for him, if he injures the girl, if he humiliates her, if he causes her to have medical bills, if he causes her to have loss of livelihood, for all those damages, he has to pay, irrespective of these other measures. What we're talking about here is specifically the fine, the specific fine that is separate from damages in the case of a girl who is raped and therefore loses her virgin status because of the rape. The fine is only to address that. So, it is the opinion of the rabbis who say a minor girl receives the fine for rape. And the Gemara asks, say the latter clause of the Baraisa that a sexually underdeveloped woman, an Elonis, has neither a fine for rape nor a fine for seduction, as she will not develop the signs of puberty, and her legal status remains that of a minor until she is 20 years of age. It's a physical abnormality, the Elonis, who doesn't mature like other women. So even when she reaches an age when she should have hit puberty, she doesn't. And she never develops, sexually. She'll never be able to have children. In her case, she's considered, because of her physical condition, a minor until she's 20, and then she becomes an adult. And she doesn't go through the 3 stages of the typical woman who is a minor until she's 12, and 12 years old in one day. And then once she shows signs of puberty, which is defined as having 2 pubic hairs, so then for the next 6 months, she's a young woman. And that's actually going to be defined more explicitly today in our reading. When she's still under the control, under the authority of her father, but she's not a minor anymore. And then once she sort of, hits well into puberty, as will be explained, then she's considered an adult, right? So legally speaking, she's an adult. By the time she's like 12 and a half, 12 and 3/4, she's an adult. She might still, obviously be living in her father's house, fed by her father, acting like a girl, which is all she is. But for certain legal questions, she's considered an adult, just as a Jewish boy is considered an adult when he turns 13. They are both now obligated in the commandments that adults are obligated in, as opposed to minors. So the sexually underdeveloped woman, the Elonis, has neither a fine for rape nor a fine for seduction, because she will not develop the signs of puberty, and her legal status remains that of a minor until she's 20, at which point she assumes the status of a grown woman. In the law, the Baraisa comes to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said a minor girl does not have a fine for rape. And the same is true for this Elonis, who emerged from her status as a minor at the age of 20 to the status of a grown woman, skipping the stage of a young woman. The first clause of the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, and the latter clause is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And recall that when we talk about the fine, it seems like the Torah itself limits who receives the fine to the case of a young woman. Right? Deuteronomy 22:28. Chapter 22, verse 28, if a man finds a young woman who is a virgin, right? The young woman, by definition, is this woman who is no longer a minor, but is not yet an adult woman. And he rapes her, he shall pay the fine, and he will have to marry her. So that's why Rabbi Meir says, okay, why would we give the fine to a minor? The Torah is being very specific. It's only when she's raped in that in-between stage, when she's characterized as a young woman. And if you say that the entire Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, with regard to a girl who refuses to remain married, Rabbi Meir holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that not only a minor girl, but a young woman also may end her marriage through refusal. And the Baraisa is referring to a young woman and not to a minor. Right, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can both be a woman who has a right of refusal if her mother or brothers betrothed her to a man, and be a woman who qualifies for the fine if she's raped. Whereas Rabbi Meir would say young women get the fine, minors don't. Minors have a right of refusal, young women don't, right? So that's why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is a time of overlap, and according to Rabbi Meir, there's not. But isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Meir disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda in this matter? It was taught, until when can a girl refuse to remain married? Until she develops 2 pubic hairs, meaning she's no longer a minor. That's when she becomes a young woman. These are the signs of puberty rendering her a young woman. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says she can refuse until the area, the pudendum, covered by the black pubic hairs is greater than the white skin of that area. And that occurs approximately 6 months later, at which point she is deemed, legally speaking, a grown woman. So rather, the Gemara suggests that Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And with regard to a minor girl, he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says that a minor girl does not receive payment of the fine for rape. She receives damages. She just doesn't qualify for the fine for rape. And therefore, an alonis is not entitled to payment because she's deemed a minor since she never develops puberty. So the Gemara asks, but does he maintain that opinion? But didn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav said with regard to the Mishna below on page 40b, which states, any case where there is the right of a father to effect the sale of his daughter as a Hebrew maidservant, right, that a father can sell his daughter into slavery. Here what that means is selling her to another Jew. So when a Jew became a slave to another Jew, the Jew had rights as a slave that a non-Jewish slave would not have. Namely, he could only remain a slave for 6 years, and then you have to set him free unless he chooses to remain a slave forever. The institution of slavery in ancient times, at the time the Torah was given, was obviously much more widespread in the world than it is now. It was a horrific institution, but it also, I don't want to, please take this with a grain of salt when I say it, but it was a kind of safety net in society. I mean, how can you say that? It's just that typically, people who fell into slavery, it was either they were captured in a war or they became so impoverished that they were starving and they would rather, sort of sell themselves into slavery. So they would eat, they would work, they weren't necessarily treated so bad, although they might be. They don't know what they're signing up for. They're becoming slaves. It might, just be absolutely the worst kind of thing. And a woman who was a slave was assumed to have been raped by her master. So it's not good. I'm not in any way defending slavery. I'm just telling you to remember that it was very common in that time. The hope was that Jews would never become enslaved because they were entering the promised land. They were going to enjoy all this blessing from the Lord once the Jews entered the promised land. It was a promise they would never have to become slaves, except that, tragically, the Jewish people, wandered off, right? They did not remain loyal to the God who redeemed them from Egypt, and they ran after the gods of others, and then they lost that protection, and then they did become ill, and they did become sick, and they did become impoverished, and they did end up becoming slaves. Better off if they became a slave to another Jew. Terrible if they were captured in war or, God forbid, sold, to non-Jews, because then they would never leave that state of slavery unless, they were redeemed by a relative, which was a huge mitzvah to do that, the redemption of the captive. At any rate, so why are we talking about this? Why am I talking about this? Okay. We'll get back to it. Oh, because if the father, as long as the father has the right to sell his daughter into slavery, she also has this right of refusal. In other words, he can only sell her while she's a minor. Once she's a young woman or an adult, he does not have that right. And likewise, if the father died and the mother or brothers betrothed that girl to a man, maybe because they couldn't afford to feed her and that's why they married her off, she would have the right to refuse her husband while she was a minor, the same period of time during which her father could have sold her into slavery. So Rav said, with regard to the Mishnah below, which states, any case where there is the right of a father to effect the sale of his daughter as a Hebrew maidservant, a Hebrew slave, i.e. when she is a minor, there is no fine if she is raped. And this is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And if it is so that Rabbi Yehuda maintains that opinion, Rav should have said that this is the statement of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, who seem to be saying the same thing. So rather, this Tana of the Baraisa holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir with regard to one law, that there is no fine for rape of a minor, the specific rape fine, there is damages. And he disagrees with him with regard to a different law, that a young woman may refuse her marriage through refusal while she is a minor and not once she becomes a young woman. So Rafram said, this entire barais is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And what is the meaning of the statement with regard to a girl who refuses? There is neither a fine for rape nor a fine for seduction. It is referring to one who is fit to refuse, i.e. as long as she is a minor, she is not entitled to the fine. And the Gemara asks, and if that is the case, let the Tana simply teach the law with regard to a minor. Why teach a simple law in so convoluted a manner? And the Gemara concludes, indeed, Kashya, this is difficult. It should have been spoken, it should have been taught in a much simpler manner. And the Gemara says, we don't know why it was taught in so convoluted a manner. And now we move on to a slightly different subject. The Baraisa stated, an Elonist, a sexually underdeveloped woman who will not develop signs of puberty, she has neither a fine for rape nor a fine for seduction. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Baraisa. A deaf mute, an imbecile, and an Elonist have a fine for rape. And they have a claim concerning virginity, that if they're that they are assumed to be a virgin when they enter a marriage, and if the husband finds that she's not a virgin, he can make a claim. So if one of these women married with the presumptive status of a virgin, and she received a corresponding marriage contract, right, 200 dinars is the amount of the ketubah instead of 100 dinars for a non-virgin, then her husband can make a claim and cause her to lose her marriage contract if he can state and prove that she was not a virgin when he married her. And the Gemara rejects this argument, right? So what is it? Is it that the Elonist receives the fine if she's raped, or that she doesn't? We seem to have a contradiction in two different baraisas, or in a baraisa and a Mishnah. And the Gemara rejects this argument. And what is the contradiction in this? We can explain it very simply. This baraisa, in which it is taught that the Elonist receives no fine, it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. That baraisa, in which it was taught that the Elonist does receive a fine, is taught in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, the majority, who disagree with Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara is puzzled. And as the resolution is so obvious, he who raised the contradiction, why did he raise it? The dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis in this matter is well known. So the Gemara answers, he cited this baraisa due to the fact that he has another baraisa from which to raise a contradiction to it. A deaf mute and an imbecile and a grown woman and a woman whose hymen was torn, not in the course of sexual relations, do not have a claim concerning virginity, as they do not have the presumptive status of a virgin. According to this baraisa, if you marry a grown woman, you can't assume that she's a virgin, and if it turns out she's not a virgin, tough luck on the husband. He had no right to assume that she was a virgin. A woman who, accidentally her hymen was torn because, she fell and she hit herself, or, she was riding a horse or something like that, and that flap of skin was torn over her private parts. It doesn't mean that she ever had sex before, but she doesn't enter marriage with a presumptive status of virginity. And likewise for the deaf mute and the imbecile. Okay, so however, a blind woman in this baraisa and an Elonist have a claim concerning virginity, that the husband can assume that they enter the marriage as virgins. Sumachos says in the name of Rabbi Meir, a blind woman does not have a claim concerning virginity. In any case, this baraisa indicates that the Elonist does have such a claim, which contradicts the other baraisa, which says the Elonist does not have such a claim. So Rav Sheshes says, this is not difficult. This baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, who holds that a woman who, in response to a claim concerning her virginity, is believed if she says that she was raped after her betrothal, and therefore she does not lose her marriage contract. Remember that when they would get married in ancient times, it was a two-step process. They would get betrothed, which is like an engagement, but it's not, because after you're betrothed, the woman is prohibited to every other man in the world. And if they break off the betrothal, she requires a bill of divorce. It's like they're married already, even if they haven't consummated the union. Usually about a year later, they would go under the chuppah, under the marriage canopy, and then they would consummate the union and be fully married. So according to this, so if she says that, okay, yes, she had been raped before the consummated the union, but it's not that she lied at the time that she was betrothed and said she was a virgin when she wasn't. Rather, after they were betrothed is when she was raped. So she didn't mislead neither she nor her family misled the husband and his family. She became a non-virgin after the betrothal. And if the husband wanted to, consummate the union with a virgin, tough luck on him. He's betrothed to a woman who got raped. It's not her fault. So she has done nothing wrong. And if she says, yes, I was raped, but it happened after I was betrothed, according to Rabban Gamliel, we believe her. And so she doesn't lose her marriage contract. And this other baraisa, which says that the Elonis does not have a claim, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, who says that a woman is not believed if she makes this claim that she was raped after she was betrothed, and therefore she does lose her marriage contract. And so the Gemara asks, say that you heard that Rabban Gamliel accepts her contention in a case where she claims that she was raped after the betrothal. However, in a case where she did not claim that that was the case, did you hear that he accepts her contention? And the Gemara answers, yes, since Rabban Gamliel said she is believed when she states that she was raped after her betrothal, the deaf, mute, and the imbecile, who can't actually make that claim for themselves, but they are also believed, even though they are unable to speak it out loud, as in cases like that, it is a case of open your mouth for the mute, meaning, right, speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And specifically what that means is when a person lacks the capacity to proffer the claim to defend themselves on their own, the court makes that claim on their behalf. Now, the Baraisa stated, a grown woman does not have a claim concerning her virginity because of changes as her body matures. Her hymen is no longer completely intact. So the man might say, well, I married her. I thought she was going to be a virgin. And then when we got together on the wedding night, she didn't have that hymen covering her private parts. So what? A lot of women, as they become adults, they don't look like little girls. That flap of skin can recede or even break. Doesn't mean that they're not virgins. That's why a grown woman does not have a claim concerning virginity, meaning the husband cannot claim against her that he was expecting her to be a virgin and she wasn't because of these changes in her body. So the Gemara asks, but didn't Rav say the sages give a grown woman who had relations on her wedding night the entire first night? Meaning that if during the wedding night they see some blood, they can assume, and she's a virgin, they can assume it's because the hymen tore, and it's not that she's suddenly menstruating, and therefore they have to cease having marital relations on the wedding night, and they'll have to wait until she ceases menstruating, and then she immerses in the mikveh, and then she counts 7 clean days, like all husbands and wives do, and then they'll be permitted to each other again. Rather, they give her the whole first night to assume that any blood which happens to be seen is coming from the torn hymen rather than menstrual flow. And that would indicate, and since they don't say that only about young women, they say that about any woman, that would indicate that even an adult woman who is a virgin has some kind of a hymen. So why would you say that she doesn't? And if she does have it, why would you say that the husband has no claim of virginity against her? Now we're on 36b, and the Gemara answers, if the husband offers a claim that there was no blood after consummating the marriage, indeed he can cause her to lose her marriage contract with that claim. However, with what are we dealing here in the Baraisa? We are dealing with one who offers a claim that he encountered an open entrance, i.e. that there was no hymen at all. As the hymen of an adult woman is no longer completely intact, his claim is of no consequence. So the Baraisa continues, the sage Sumachos says in the name of Rabbi Meir, a blind woman does not have a claim concerning virginity. That the husband who marries a blind woman can't assume that she is a virgin, or that she's she has the physical signs that she's a virgin. Why can't he assume that? Rabbi Zera said, due to the fact that a blind woman might hit herself when she falls to the ground, causing her hymen to break. And the Gemara says, well, all girls tend to fall down when they're kids, and some of them, might have their hymen ruptured. What is unique about blind girls? And the Gemara answers, when all of the other girls fall, they see the blood flow and they show it to their mom. And the mother would then examine them and discover that her hymen was broken, and then this girl would lose the presumptive legal status of a virgin later when she marries. This blind girl does not see the flow of blood, and therefore she doesn't show it to her mom. And due to that possibility, the man who married the blind woman must have considered the likelihood that her hymen might not be intact. So even though she never had sex with a man, she does not have the legal presumptive status of virginity. New subject. It's really hard to talk about this stuff, but we don't shy away from it because the Talmud will examine every aspect of life. We'll spend a lot more time talking about buying and selling a house, buying and selling a field. What happens if you don't get what you bargained for? And it's much easier to discuss those kinds of topics. But when we're doing this very, kind of private, personal stuff, we don't shy away from it because the fact is the Torah spoke to these subjects, and therefore the sages and we need to understand what the law is. So the previous Baraisa concluded, and one who leaves her husband due to a bad reputation, she has neither the fine for rape nor the fine for seduction. Now the initial understanding is that the Baraisa is referring to a young betrothed woman who leaves her husband because she committed adultery. And the Gemara asks, one who leaves her husband due to a bad reputation is subject to stoning as an adulteress. Clearly she's not entitled to the fine. Why would we even suggest that she might be? And Rav Sheshes said, this is what the Baraisa is saying. One about whom a bad reputation emerged in her youth, that she engaged in sexual relations, has neither a fine for rape nor a fine for seduction, as the assumption is that she is no longer a virgin. There's no proof that she ever had sex with anybody, but there's enough of an appearance of impropriety. And the Gemara will explain what constitutes that kind of appearance. Rav Papa said, conclude from it with regard to this tainted document whose authenticity was compromised, that we do not collect a debt with it. Now they're drawing a comparison between a woman who in her youth somehow acquired a reputation that she had sex before marriage, and a document which somebody has reason to believe was forged, a promissory note to collect a debt, but we have reason to suspect that the one who brings the promissory note to collect a debt actually forged it, and therefore he's not going to be allowed to collect on that note. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this promissory note that we don't believe it? If you say that a rumor emerged about it, that it is a forged document, and in the corresponding case here, the case of a bad reputation, that a rumor emerged about this girl, that she engaged in promiscuous sexual relations. But didn't Rava say, if a rumor emerged about a woman in a town as one who engaged in promiscuous sexual relations, one need not be concerned about it. The assumption is that it is insubstantial, as a reputation based on rumor is disregarded. So it's not just because some friend of hers or some jerk boy who wants to harm her told other people that she had sex, and that's how the rumor got started, that she's now going to have an awful time trying to get married, etc. No, we don't believe the rumor. We set the rumor aside. The rumor has to be more substantial than that. What is a substantial rumor? Rather, it is that two witnesses came and said, she propositioned us to engage in forbidden relations. And in the corresponding case here with regard to a document, it is a case where two people came and said, meaning testified in court under oath, and they said, that the witnesses said that this man who's now holding the document said to them, the witnesses, forge a document from me. So the Gemara asks, well, granted, there in the case of the rumor of promiscuity, immoral men are common. And even if they refused her, the ones that she said, sleep with me, who now became witnesses against her, and they didn't sleep with her, so why, right? They're saying she propositioned them, they didn't do it. So why does she have a bad reputation? Because, men who are willing to sleep with a woman that's willing are all too common, and therefore we have reason to think that if she propositioned this man, she propositioned other men, and her, reputation suffers. But can we make the same assumption about the forger? There are many men who are immoral and would take up her proposition. However, here, with regard to forgery, even if this man assumed the presumptive status of one seeking forged documents, do all the Jewish people assume presumptive status as forgers? Right, that a scribe could be found who would forge the document, and witnesses could be found who would lie for the forged document. Why are we going to assume that other people participated with him in creating the forgery? Even if he has a bad reputation, we're not going to ascribe a bad reputation to other Jews who might have joined in making this document. So the Gemara answers here too, since he is actively seeking a forgery, we say that he forged the document and he wrote it. He didn't hire a criminal scribe, he just forged it himself. Even if others are not suspected of cooperating with him, there is suspicion with regard to the document. Therefore, the case of the tainted document and the woman with a bad reputation are comparable. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 3. Now we begin Mishnah number 2, and we're well into page 36b. Mishnah number 2 of chapter 3, and these are the cases of young women, that specific category, hit puberty, not yet an adult woman, who do not have a fine paid to their fathers when they are raped or seduced, right? They don't receive the fine for rape. They might get damages, but not the specific fine for rape. And who are these women? One who has intercourse with a convert or with a captive woman or with a Gentile slave who were redeemed, converted, or emancipated when they were more than 3 years and 1 day old. As, for example, the case of the slave, while they were enslaved, we just assume that they were raped, and therefore they don't have the presumptive legal status of a virgin when they enter marriage. Somebody who joins the Jewish people in the ancient times, it's not that we're saying that she was likely to be promiscuous or she was likely to have been raped. It's that she's entering, the house of the Jewish people, and we have no idea what her level of purity was while she was outside of it. It's like a newborn. But with respect to this question, you don't have the presumptive legal status of a virgin. And therefore, they do not receive the fine. They might get damages, but they don't receive the fine. Where am I? Yeah. And the Mishnah resumes its list of the cases of young women who are not entitled to the fine for rape, or for seduction by the following men. In the case of one who engages in intercourse with his daughter, with his daughter's daughter, with his son's daughter, with his wife's daughter, with her son's daughter, or with her daughter's daughter, these women do not receive payment of a fine. And that is due to the fact that he who did it is liable to the death penalty. And that the death penalty is administered by the court, not the heavenly court, but the earthly court. And anyone who is liable to receive the death penalty does not also pay a fine. As it is stated, and yet no harm follow, he shall be punished, as we discussed yesterday. This verse indicates that if a woman dies and the one who struck her is liable to receive the death penalty for it, he is exempt from payment, right? You either get the death penalty or you pay a fine, not both. That's Mishnah number 2. The Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Dosa said, one and the same thing with regard to a captive woman. The statement of Rabbi Yehuda is that which we said in the Mishnah. The statement of Rabbi Dosa is as it is taught in a baraisa, right? A captive woman loses her presumptive legal status as a virgin. The statement of Rabbi Dosa is as taught in this baraisa: a captive daughter or the wife of a priest who was redeemed, she partakes of teruma, meaning she didn't lose her virgin status, right? Because, for example, if the daughter of a priest goes out and has promiscuous sex, that's actually a death penalty offense. But even if they don't impose the death penalty, she loses the right to eat teruma, food which is consecrated only for the use of priests and their families, she could eat it as his family member, but if she's proven to be a promiscuous woman, she can no longer eat that consecrated food. So according to Rabbi Dosa, if the daughter of a priest was taken captive and then she was redeemed, she can still eat the teruma. It means we don't assume that she was raped while she was a captive. She didn't lose her virgin status. This is the statement of Rabbi Dosa. Now, in explanation, Rabbi Dosa said, and what did this Arab who took her captive do to her, as an example of one who takes her Jewish women captive, and due to the fact that he lasciviously squeezed between her breasts, did he render her unfit to marry her into the priesthood? Although he may have taken liberties with her, he might have groped her, as it were, there is no proof and therefore no concern that he raped her. So Rabbah said, well, perhaps that is not so. And their opinions differ. Perhaps Rabbi Yehuda states his opinion only here with regard to payment of a fine, so that the sinner will not profit through exemption from the fine because this girl was taken captive in her youth. Right? When he rapes her, why should he benefit from the fact that when she was younger, she had been taken captive and lost her presumptive legal status as a virgin, so that now he's exempt from paying the fine? Why would he benefit from that, this rapist? And so we shouldn't exempt him from paying the fine. However, there, with regard to teruma, perhaps Rabbi Yehuda does hold in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis that, she loses her presumptive legal status as a virgin, and therefore she can no longer eat the food consecrated for priests. She can eat other food in her father's house, just not specifically teruma. Alternatively, there is another distinction between their opinions. Perhaps Rabbi Dosa stated his opinion only there with regard to teruma, whose legal status today is by rabbinic law. Once the temple was destroyed, teruma was still collected for priests, but it was done so according to rabbinic law, not Torah law, and therefore, in cases of doubt, that we were lenient. And however, with regard to payment of a fine, which is mandated by Torah law, he holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, and the rapist is exempt from payment based on the principle that the burden of proof is incumbent upon the claimant. And she cannot prove that her captors did not engage in intercourse with her and that she is a virgin, and therefore, while the rapist would have to pay damages, he would not have to pay specifically the fine of the rapist. So Abaye said to Rabbah, and is the rationale for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda here in the case of a fine to ensure that the sinner will not profit? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says a captive woman who is taken captive remains in her state of sanctity with the presumptive status of a virgin? Even if she was in captivity when she was 10 years old, her marriage contract later, when she marries, is 200 dinars, that of a virgin. And there, in that case, what relevance is there for the rationale to ensure that the sinner will not profit? The Baraisa refers to a marriage contract and no transgression is involved. And the Gemara answers, there too, Rabbi Yehuda issues the same ruling for a different reason. She receives the marriage contract of a virgin because if she didn't, perhaps men would refrain and not marry her due to their suspicion that her captors violated her. So there you see that Rabbi Yehuda was, making a policy consideration, and that maybe according to the strict letter of the law, we should assume that a woman who was held captive or enslaved had been raped by her captors, but we need to find an out from that status because it might prevent her from finding a husband when she's redeemed from captivity or slavery. So the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yehuda maintain that a captive woman remains in her state of sanctity? But isn't it taught in a different Baraisa, one who redeems a captive, he may marry her, even if he is a priest. But if he testifies that she did not engage in sexual relations while in captivity, then he may not marry her. And Rabbi Yehuda says, both in this case where he redeemed her, and in that case where he testified, he may not marry her, lest she was violated and rendered unfit to marry a priest. And the Gemara comments, this Baraisa itself is difficult. On the one hand, you say, one who redeems a captive, he may marry her. And then it was taught, but if he testifies that she remained pure while she was in captivity, then he may not marry her. Is that to say that due to the fact that he also testifies that she was not violated, that he may not marry her? Yes, that's exactly what it means, right? The fact that he went and redeemed her Beautiful. What a beautiful thing to do, to redeem the captive. It's a big, big mitzvah. And then why shouldn't he be able to marry her if she wants to marry him? If he comes to court to testify because he has somehow firsthand knowledge that while she was in captivity, she was never raped by her captors, and then he's going to go and marry her, then we'll start to be concerned that his testimony is biased, right? And that the reason he claimed that she was never raped is because he's intending to marry her and he wants a woman legally deemed a virgin for himself to marry. So we say that if he becomes the one who testifies about her retaining her sanctity, then he's not allowed to marry her. But if he's simply the one who redeemed her, he may marry her. And the Gemara answers this is not difficult, as this is what the Baraisa is saying. One who redeems a captive woman and testifies that she was not violated, he may marry her. However, if he only testifies that she was not violated and he's not the one who redeemed her, then he may not marry her because we're worried about this biased testimony. Now, with regard to I'm almost done, so if you have any questions or comments, get them in. With regard to the apparent contradiction between the two statements of Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara says, in any case, this Baraisa is difficult according to Rabbi Yehuda. As contrary to his earlier statement, he states that a captive woman does not retain the presumptive status of a virgin. And Rav Papa said, amend the text and say that Rabbi Yehuda says, both in this case and in that case, he may marry her. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, actually, do not amend the Baraisa and learn it as it was taught. In the Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda spoke to them according to the statement of the rabbis, according to my opinion, that the presumptive status of a redeemed captive woman is that of a virgin, both in this case and in that case, he may marry her. However, according to your opinion, the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, according to your opinion that there is a concern lest she was violated, then the law should be that both in this case and in that case, he may not marry her. And in that way, the Gemara reconciles the apparent contradiction in the two statements of Rabbi Yehuda. All right. We're right at the bottom of page 36b, and with God's help, we'll be picking it up tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, to do page 37, where we'll continue discussing Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Okay, questions or comments on page 36? Reminder that we are in a holiday. It's a kind of minor holiday with no real, mitzvahs, no traditions of how we observe it. In ancient times, it was observed more. This is Tu B'Av, the 15th of the Hebrew month of Av. And just as the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, was the saddest day in the Hebrew calendar, which we commemorated. It was last Shabbos, but we observed the fast on Sunday. Just 6 days later, we have this high point, maybe not the most joyful day in the Jewish calendar, but certainly one of them. And in ancient times, this was like the Jewish Valentine's Day, when the maidens would, borrow clothes from a friend, so you couldn't tell who was rich or who was poor. They would all wear white. They would dance in the fields, and the boys would go out, and there was matchmaking to be done. Nothing promiscuous, but this is a time when young men and women would find each other to get married. James, sometimes a woman in her 20s or even 30s can be considered to be a minor according to certain circumstances. Exactly, that's the case of the Elonis, right? If she didn't develop sexually up until the age of 20, she's still considered a minor. After that, they just call her an adult because, there's nothing wrong with her intellectually, and it wouldn't make sense to keep calling her a minor. And finally, Sharon, it is illogical that a minor girl can refuse, but a young woman cannot. A child may not have the depth of understanding to refuse, but a woman is likely to have more clarity in perceiving what she is agreeing to. I agree with you, but I think what they would probably answer is that once she's an adult, she's not subject to the law of the minor who can walk away from a marriage because the marriage never took hold. Once she's an adult, and she remained in that marriage even for one day as an adult, then she's married. Right? And so they can end the marriage, but it requires the get, right? I think that's what the sages are saying. Once she's in that marriage, even for one day as an adult, she requires a bill of divorce in order to end the marriage. Now, I think your answer to me would probably be, yeah, but when she's a minor, she has that right of refusal. And when she's an adult, she can only ask for the get, but it's in the husband's power. And that is just the terrible imbalance of that patriarchal system where women didn't have the right to sue for divorce. And so, and that's, I mean, let's put it this way. It's apparently unfair to us. It strikes us as very unfair. Maybe God has I know God has greater wisdom than us and had some reason why the Torah spells it out in that way that I just don't understand. So that's what we have today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 37.